Well, how many brought your Bibles to church? If you did, hold them up. I think the sermon will always make more sense when you can follow along in your own Bible. And let's find in those Mark chapter 5. In fact, if you would take your phone, everybody take your phone and hold it up. Jerry, waiting for you. Take your phone. Show me your phone. Show me your phone. Okay, now I want you to point it at this QR code right here on the screen and just see, let me get out of the way, point it at that. Today's passage will come up, and I want you to see how much better it is, really see the difference it makes when you really can follow along. So when I'm talking about Scripture, kind of track it there. If you've not done that before, it really does make a huge difference. Well, the circus is in town. You may not have known that. You can go to Honda Center this afternoon, 3 o'clock. Goes till next Sunday afternoon. Plop down $75 for a cheap seat and enjoy the showing of Ringling Brothers Barnum and Bailey Circus, an operation that has brought smiles to children and adults alike since 1919. That world-famous three-ring operation has long been known for its entertaining elephants and lions and tigers and camels and trained dogs and trapeze artists and high-wire acts and clowns and the like. Every act, they had 3 rings, and the idea was that there's just something always going on. And every act was designed to grab your attention and leaving you talking about it long after you got home. Did you see how those beautifully decorated horses, how they kind of danced around? How many have been to that circus? Yeah, a good number. As a side note, after 98 years, they closed down in 2017. But came back just 3 or 4 years ago in 2023. But there was just one difference. I'm curious, does anyone know the difference with the new circus? No animals. Isn't that something? Large or small, exotic or regular, they no longer use animals. So maybe I just saved you $75 and you're welcome. Now listen, it's still a great gig. They have BMX bicycles and motorcycles and all these other parkour acrobats and a lot of other more contemporary things. But back in the day, going to the circus, one of the most interesting parts when the circus came to town, when the circus came to our town, to Anaheim, was called the Elephant Walk. You see, the circus really did come to town by train. And if you are familiar with the roads and the area around Honda Center, then Arrowhead Pond, you may know the closest place for a train was at the corner of Sunkist and Cerritos. So at the beginning of the circus, and then a couple weeks later at the end of the thing, police would shut down that train intersection and shut down a long stretch of road, and they would offload all the camels and horses and tigers, etc. Tigers were in rolling cases, and they would parade them down the street from that intersection down the street to the upper parking lot of Honda Center, where they had holding pens, including the world-famous elephants. And yes, they really did famously walk in a single file line, each one with his trunk grabbing the tail of the one in front. It was a beautiful thing. I have seen it at least 4 times. But here's an interesting thing about those elephants. A trainer could pound into the ground a very simple stake and then take a rope or a chain and tie it around that, and then tie it around one of the elephant's legs. And you know what? That animal that could weigh as much as 5, maybe more, males could get up to 6 tons, would stay right there. And anyone seeing that would have the same question, well, why don't they just leave? right? I mean, these are animals that can move enormous loads or even push over trees if they wanted. So why don't they just run away? Not even run away. Why don't they just walk away? Just snap that like a piece of string. Well, here's why. It's because those elephants, when they're first born, they're tied to a stake just like that one. So as babies, they pull and tug and strain, and they're just simply not strong enough to break free. It is occurring to me right now, how many of you right now are thinking, why did he have us do that QR code? I don't see any elephants in the Bible here. Well, hang with me, it's coming. Now, fast forward however many years when these same elephants, now they're fully grown, definitely strong enough to walk free without even thinking about it. But, and here's the thing, at some point back there, they stopped trying. And they came to believe that rope or that chain, in fact, was stronger than it really was. And I wonder how many people are watching online or have walked in here today kind of like that. Not with a chain around your ankle, but maybe a chain around your heart. Because you fought the same old battle for so long that you've kind of decided, this is who I am. I'll always struggle with this. Nothing's ever going to change. Well, today we're going to meet a man in Mark chapter 5 who had been living with chains far longer than he should have, and we're going to discover something wonderful. We're going to see how it is Jesus specializes in breaking chains that people have long since stopped believing could be broken. It's like the guy who wants to give up smoking and hasn't had a cigarette for 8 months. He would be the first to tell you quitting isn't the hardest part. Staying quit. That's the trick. Right? For years, I'd quit on Monday and get back to it on Wednesday. I'd take a pack of cigarettes and throw them down the toilet or throw them away, and a couple days later, I'm at the Quickie Mart plopping down money for another pack. I would tell my wife, this time I mean it, and in fact, I wasn't lying. I earnestly did and do mean it. But somehow I'd always find myself right back where I started in this process until, geez, you get so tired of disappointing yourself. Maybe you've never smoked a cigarette in your life. But I suspect every one of us has had that feeling. Maybe for you it's your temper. Or it's alcohol. Or pornography or worry. Maybe for you it's gossip. Or laziness. Or bitterness. Or shopping. Or being judgmental or food. Whatever it is, isn't it easier to make promises to yourself and so much more difficult keeping those promises? Until after trying again and again and again and again and again, we stop saying, I'm going to beat this thing. And we start saying, I guess this is just who I am. Mark 5, starting at verse 1, your Bible says, they went across the lake to the region of the Gerasenes. Now, in the paragraph just before this, at the tail end of chapter 4, the disciples have just survived one of the worst nights of their lives. A violent storm came up suddenly that nearly sank their boat. It was so bad, in fact, that even the most seasoned, lifelong fishermen, they're scared to death. They think, I'm going to die. I've never seen anything quite like this. Until Jesus stood up and simply said, peace, be still, and instantly the wind and the waves stopped. The water was smooth and the storm was over. That was chapter 4. So can you imagine maybe what those same disciples are thinking as they get ready to hop out of the boat in chapter 5? And I'm glad that's over. No more storms. Finally, things are going to settle down. Well, they don't know it yet, but the storm on the lake was nothing compared to the storm on the shore. Verse 2 says, when Jesus got out of the boat, a man with an impure spirit came from the tombs to meet him. Again, the disciples, you've just survived the storm. You're probably exhausted. Your clothes may still be wet. Maybe you're helping kind of pull the boat onto shore, and you're looking forward to finding a place to sit down so you can finally catch your breath. And before you can even get your bearings, you hear someone running. And they're thinking, what the what? And so they just react, they just instinctively jerk back, move away, and yet Jesus stands still, if not takes one step forward. We learn more in verse 3. It says, this man lived in the tombs. Did you catch that? He lived in the tombs. That means he didn't just visit the cemetery sometimes. We love going to cemeteries, don't we? He lived in the cemetery. This man lived in the tombs, and no one could bind him anymore, not even with a chain. That tells us anymore. That kind of implies that there was a time when they could tie him up. He's acting wild and being violent, and somebody thought, well, maybe this will work. So they tied him down with ropes, and that worked. And then later they had to upgrade to chains. And after that, maybe they put his hands and his feet in iron shackles. And listen, each one of those worked for a while. Verse 4. For he'd often been chained, hand and foot. But he tore the chains apart and broke the irons on his feet. And then Mark adds this heartbreaking detail. No one was strong enough to subdue him. Not his family, not his neighbors, not the people who only knew about him, not the people who loved him and cared for him, not the wisest or the strongest men in town. Nobody. Until eventually everyone concluded he's beyond help. He'll never change, verse 5 says, night and day among the tombs and in the hills, he would cry out and cut himself with stones. Going on night and day. You know, I have this thing when I go somewhere and see something sad. When I leave and maybe get back on a plane, maybe this is in another country, and I leave and get on a plane heading home, that somewhere in the back of my simple mind, I think, I get on the plane and then they go and they put on their real clothes and eat the real food. You know, But in fact, night and day, that means there were no breaks. There was no, okay, now I'm going to get back to normal. There were no relaxing afternoons, no good weekends. And over time, everyone saw how the man's suffering had moved from occasional to permanent, certainly constant, with no light at the end of the tunnel. This is where he is. This is who he is. Maybe you said that kind of thing about someone. Maybe you said it about yourself. I think one of the most effective lies the enemy of your soul loves to whisper is this: you have been this way so long, you'll always be this way. But when Jesus stood there and everyone else saw a man who was too far gone, he saw someone who was about to be set free. And I want you to notice something else in verse 5. Mark tells us the man was cutting himself with sharp stones. And it makes us think that while everyone saw how wild he was acting on the outside, that in fact he was also suffering on the inside. Had this voice that kept that kept saying, hurt yourself, cut yourself. It's what you deserve. And that may be where a lot of people are today, where from the outside life looks pretty normal. You go about your day, you go to school, or you go to work, you smile, you come to church, and nobody would know. However, inside, you're battling fear, or rage, or temptation, or something else, and it just never seems to end. And here's what can happen if we are not careful. We can live with that for so long that we begin to think that's just part of who we are. I'm always worried. I've always had a temper. This is just my personality. This is just how I'm tired. Red hair, hello. It doesn't tell us how long this guy had been this way. Months, years, don't know. But it had been long enough that he and everyone else had come to accept it. It had been a long time. But here's some good news this morning. Jesus never confuses a long time with forever. Everyone else had learned to live with this situation, learned to live with the guy in the cemetery and in the hills, but somebody had not. Verse 6 says, when he saw Jesus from a distance, he ran and fell on his knees in front of him. I just love that verse because it's when he sees Jesus from afar. There's something about Jesus that brings him closer. I've got to get in there. And in fact, when you study the life and ministry of Jesus, there was something about him that always drew in broken people. Tax collectors wanted to be around him. Sinners wanted to be around him. Outcasts wanted to be around him. Even children wanted to be around him. And now the most feared man in the whole region comes running toward the only person who can help him and falls in front of Jesus. Then, verse 7, he shouted at the top of his voice, "What do you want with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God?" Now, I don't want to spend time this morning trying to understand everything about demons because that's not really the point of the story. But the point of this story is for you and me to understand the absolute authority of Jesus. That when he speaks to a storm, it goes away. And here, even the demons know who he is. Once again, starting at verse 7. He shouted, this man, at the top of his voice, "What do you want with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God?" For Jesus had said to him, "Come out of this man, you impure spirit." It doesn't say it, but it really is implied how calm Jesus is in the midst of this. He doesn't panic. He doesn't shout. He doesn't call for help. He simply speaks. That's because he's never had to raise his voice to prove his authority. When Jesus speaks, blind eyes open. When Jesus speaks, dead people walk out of tombs. And when Jesus speaks, chains begin to fall off. Verse 9, Jesus asked him, "What is your name?" Now, did Jesus really need that? Was he missing that piece of information? Surely not. He already knew everything about this man. So why ask? And I wonder if maybe it was for everyone else near or at a distance who were watching this thing play out. Because up until now, nobody saw a man anymore. They saw the crazy guy, the dangerous guy, the cemetery guy. But that's never how Jesus sees people. He doesn't see the label, he sees the life. He sees the person underneath the pain. He sees in each one of us the image of God underneath all the brokenness. Jesus asked him, "What is your name?" "My name is Legion," he replied, "for we are many." And he begged Jesus again and again not to send them out of the area. This is the demons talking. It says a large herd of pigs was feeding on the nearby hillside. The demons begged Jesus, "Send us among the pigs. Allow us to go into them." He gave them permission, and the impure spirits came out and went into the pigs. The herd, about 2,000 in number. That's big, right? The herd, about 2,000 in number, rushed down the steep bank into the lake and were drowned. 14, those tending the pigs ran off and reported this in the town and countryside. And the people went out to see what had happened. Now comes probably my favorite part of the whole story, verse 15. When they came to Jesus, they saw the man who had been possessed by the legion of demons sitting there, dressed in his right mind. I love those three, sitting there, dressed in his right mind. Because those aren't just details of the story, those are proof. This is God's way of saying, look what Jesus can do. If you ever wanted a before and after picture in the Bible, this is it. Remember, this is a guy who's been running and screaming day and night, cutting himself, living among the tombs, howling among the hills. But look at him now. He's not running anymore. He's sitting. He's no longer out of control. He's completely at peace. He's not naked, having torn his clothes. Now he's fully clothed. No longer tormented in his mind. What changed? What happened? Jesus happened. Nobody else's chains worked. Nobody else's efforts worked, but being with Jesus for this man changed everything. And friend, I believe one of the greatest evidences of a changed life isn't that someone suddenly becomes perfect. It is that they begin enjoying the presence of Jesus. They want to read his word. Get into the Bible. They want to spend time with him. They want to pray. They want to worship. Not because someone is making them, but because something on the inside has changed. And that has nothing to do with religion. It speaks to a relationship we can have, a personal relationship we can have with God through Christ. And here's something I want you to take home from this verse. That Jesus doesn't just rescue people from something. He rescues them to something. That's what freedom really is. It's not the absence of chains, it's the presence of the Lord. Verse 16 says, those who had seen it told the people what had happened to the demon-possessed man and told about the pigs as well. Isn't that funny? That is such a human thing to do. They couldn't tell the one story. They had to tell both stories. You wouldn't believe what happened to that man, and you're really not going to believe what happened to the pigs. So everybody comes out to see for themselves. And wouldn't one think that the townspeople, having lived with this man's torment and keeping their kids in and telling their teenagers, don't go out at night, don't go over there for all this time, would not one think that they would just be thrilled? But check out verse 17. It says, then the people began to plead with Jesus to leave their region. That's something. That's their response. Not, oh man, you saved our whole community. Not, can you help my family too? Not, can you teach us? Let us grow closer to you. Not, can we follow you? They simply say, please leave. Isn't that a sad part of that story? The idea of someone wanting deliverance and being delivered, and those around him, near and far, they want him delivered, but they want delivered themselves because of all the torment and trouble and fear he's caused. And yet they come away with this attitude that says, get rid of the demons, but save our pigs. People can get strangely comfortable with brokenness, can't they? Families do it. Individuals do it. Churches do it. Communities do it. We learn to say things like, once again, that's just the way it is, until we adjust our lives around the problem instead of believing God for a miracle. And the fact is, sometimes Jesus disrupts your plans in order to change your life. He'll upset your routine. He'll challenge your priorities. He'll ask you to trust him in ways that are so uncomfortable. But he's never made a life worse by changing it. He only makes it new. Verse 18 says, as Jesus was getting into the boat, the man who had been demon-possessed begged to go with him. And honestly, who can blame him, right? If I were that man, I wouldn't want Jesus out of my sight either. This is the first peaceful day he's had in I don't know how long. The one person who gave him his life back is climbing into that boat. And the last thing this guy wants is to be left behind. But verse 19 says, Jesus didn't let him, but said, go home to your own people and tell them how much the Lord has done for you and how he has had mercy on you. Go home. Maybe the two hardest words this man had heard all day. Go back. Go to where people know your name. Go to where people know your story. Go to where people have seen all your little screw-ups that turned into big screw-ups and ultimately led to where you are. Go to where people watched you run to the cemetery and children were afraid of you. He says, go home. But see, what's happening is Jesus didn't just give him a new life. He gave him a new purpose, because up until now, he had been known by everyone. He had been known for everything that was wrong with him. And now Jesus says, now I want you to be known for what God has done for you. Isn't that beautiful? That the place of his greatest pain was about to become the place of his greatest ministry. Friend, after you're delivered, after you're forgiven, after the Lord has turned your life around, the best answer is not necessarily to move away and start over. Nobody will be more touched. No testimony will be stronger than when those things happen in you and you go home. Go right back around to all those people so they can see what the Lord can do. In fact, verse 20 says, so the man went away and began to tell people in the Decapolis how much Jesus had done for him, and all the people were amazed. It struck me. I've been working with this story for a couple weeks, and increasingly, this last week. But not until this morning did I realize that Jesus crossed the Sea of Galilee, which really you would call a big lake. Crossed the Sea of Galilee, not because there was a stadium full of people, not because there was a crusade waiting on the other side, and that's great. He went over there for this one man, set him free, and then, mission accomplished, get back on the boat and hightail it back. He did it for one person. 4 or 5 times in our ministry, Penny Reno and I have dealt with demons. You're hearing that, and someone's thinking, oh, yeah, probably not demons. Maybe somebody was out of control. Maybe somebody was on drugs. Maybe. I'm telling you, everybody in the church, everybody who knows that story, everybody who witnessed it firsthand, believer or not, would have said, yep, demons. And in fact, on at least one occasion, the people were dismissed, and Penny and I, and in fact, I think Rhonda Addison over here to the right, we knelt in front of this man, old, long wooden altar. And began to pray for his deliverance, that God would set him free. I resisted doing it when I read the verse where the demons answered, but I kid you not, he spoke in a voice that was not his. He said things he should not have known. Oh, I'm so tempted to go into the stories. Talk about strength. breaking the chains. We're at this altar, and one time I'm right with him, and we're just kind of in the face, and his face is just beet red, and when he's talking, he's spitting. And I remember at one time, I don't know why exactly, don't recall, but at one time he lifted off the ground just a little bit that altar. And I thought, wow. Didn't really know, after the first time we got training, as one does. Didn't really know at first what to do, but we knew we had to do something. And all I could think of was John 14, verses 13 and 14, where Jesus said, I will do whatever you ask in my name, so that the Father may be glorified in the Son. Said, you may ask me for anything in my name, and I'll do it. And I remember us quoting every Bible verse we'd ever memorized and made up some lines that maybe should have been in the Bible. But I just remember so many times, and with a peace that only came from the Lord, casting these demons out of this person, to leave him, no pigs, to leave him and go into the middle of the sea and never to return to him again, in the name of Jesus. That brother's doing okay today. Isn't that a story? What has you bound today? I bet 98% of us, you could answer that question. What is it that chained you, had you tied up back there, and at the beginning, the Lord could have helped you just get away from it. But you didn't. Until that happened time after time after time after time. And maybe now you've come to the place where you think, this is me. It's who I am. I don't know what your deal is, what your story is, but I will tell you this. I would submit that who you am isn't who God wanted you to be. That he sees the image of the Father in you. He, the one who with his voice, by speaking the words, he calms waves. He smooths out seas. He heals the sick. He restores sight to the blind. He restores withered hands. And he casts out demons by the power of his own name. And then, before leaving, he says, and you can do those things too, in the power of my name.